So if you found that your lesson assessment requires an open response, you'll need to create a rubric for it. And a rubric is very important because an open response has so many different answers and is complicated that we need a way to organize the information or criteria so that 2 teachers or 3 teachers grading the same student can get the same grade. We call this reliability. So if we had a project we were grading and 3 teachers graded a student's project, they should all come up with the same basic grade. If not, then we can say that the assessment is not reliable and thus we can throw it out. So we have to make sure that we all reach the same score. So keep in mind, rubrics are not assessments. They're just an organized way to score it, and they're made up of 2 parts. The first one is making sure that we have a list of action-verb criteria, things that the student does that we are looking for. So if we take the learning outcome of interpret, we could break that down into 3 criteria. They have to be able to explain as part of their interpretation. That explanation should be in depth, and that explanation should have supporting examples for us to say, you're doing a good job of interpreting. Now again, this is up to the teacher, and this is what you spend time debating with your fellow teachers about what interpret actually means. Then we need some levels of proficiency. What does a great interpretation look like? What does an okay interpretation look like, and so on. And one thing that we'd ask you to not do is represent the different proficiencies in a value way. So we try to avoid words like, oh, that is a poor answer, or we put a little stick figure that shows that you're not very creative, or you're slow. When we do one that's not valued, we just say what it is. So here's one that exceeds the proficiency set, meets the proficiency set, developing the proficiency set, and is below this proficiency set. It doesn't mean you're bad or good, it's just where you are at the proficiency. So if we want to interpret a scene, we would want to make sure it matches by having the criteria here. That's what we mean by matching. So if I think these 3 things are interpret, I know for sure I'm measuring it. Notice I'm not putting in anything with behaviors in it. I'm not asking them to have their grammar and spelling correct. That can be something else if you think that's important. I just want to know how well they can interpret a scene. So I will come up with a description of what I believe is exceeding the proficiency, an explanation. So I think an explanation that's appropriate to the topic and has 3 new ideas will do a great job of showing me they can interpret. If their answer is in depth with 3 paragraphs, at least 8 sentences each, or spoken for 1 minute, I think that's exceeds the proficiency. And then if I think they can have 3 supporting examples appropriate to the explanation, those 3 things all scoring at exceeding will show me that they can interpret. Then, to create the rest of the rubric, you just copy and paste and change the quantitative or qualitative words across so that you have consistency from one end to the other. If you change the criteria as you go across, then you're really measuring something else. So keep it the same. If you have the opportunity in creating the photo album, as we discussed earlier, you can come up with other ways to measure whether or not they can interpret. Every time you do that, it doesn't have to have a grade. We call these informal assessments when they have no grade. And if you want to assign a grade, you can call those formal assessments. But the idea is that you want to see their progression as they go through trying to learn to interpret, which we call formative assessments. Once you say this is your final grade, and whether or not you can interpret a scene, and this can't be changed at all, then that becomes your summative assessment, and that's your final grade. Next steps is, now that we have a lesson objective, we have an assessment that's going to give us great evidence, we now need to teach our lesson that's going to give them opportunities to do those things of interpretation. And so we want to capture this in a student-centered learning activity that gives them a whole bunch of opportunities to do that. And so I'm going to introduce you to an instructional approach called CREED. And that will end the final aspect of writing a backwards design lesson plan.